There is a perfume that costs less than a typical dinner, less than a movie ticket, less than what you spend in a single day. And yet, it did something that $300 fragrances never could. It didn't just sell millions, it changed the way the world thinks about perfume. This liquid has been on the skin of supermodels who defined a generation, and at the same time, forgotten at the bottom of a backpack. It was used in multi-million-dollar fashion campaigns and shared between couples who didn't even know who bought it first. It shows up at sophisticated parties and in the most ordinary hallways imaginable, and that shouldn't make sense, because in the world of perfumery, there's an invisible rule. The more expensive, the more desirable. The rarer, the more valuable. The more exclusive, the more respected. This perfume breaks all of them. It's simple, it's accessible, it's everywhere, and that's exactly why everyone wants it. But this isn't a video about smell. This is about the most efficient product design of the last 30 years, hidden inside a bottle that looks like nothing special. This is CK1 by Calvin Klein, and to understand why it became inevitable, you have to go back to a time when everything changed. Go back to the 1980s, a decade where perfumes weren't worn. They dominated the room. Walking into an elevator meant being hit by a dense cloud, heavy, impossible to ignore. Fragrances didn't ask for space. They took it. It was leather. It was tobacco. It was intense spice. For men, the scent had to dominate. For women, heavy florals, almost suffocating. There was no neutrality. The bottles were heavy, gold, excessive. They looked like luxury objects meant to be displayed. The message was clear. Perfume wasn't about you. It was about status. It was about walking into a room and being noticed. But something started to shift. The new generation didn't want excess anymore. Culture flipped. Simple jeans, white t-shirts, raw music, no filters. Generation X didn't want to impress. They wanted authenticity. They wanted lightness. They wanted silence. And at that moment, the entire perfume industry was stuck in the past, carrying weight, while the world was asking for simplicity. That was the problem, and no one seemed willing to solve it until an idea appeared so simple. It sounded absurd. What if perfume wasn't made to dominate the room, but to disappear into it? The idea didn't seem revolutionary. In fact, it seemed wrong. Because for decades, the fragrance industry had built an almost unquestionable rule. Perfume has gender. Men smell one way, women smell another. This division wasn't just cultural, it was structural. The entire industry was built on top of it. Different campaigns, different bottles, different languages. For men, strength. For women, seduction. Mixing these two worlds wasn't innovation. At the time, it was seen as a mistake, but Calvin Klein saw something no one else wanted to admit. The new generation didn't want to choose anymore. They didn't want labels. They wanted something simple, direct, functional. And that's when the question that changed everything appeared. If cleanliness is universal, why can't perfume be? That was the foundation of CK1. Not a men's perfume, not a women's perfume, but a shared fragrance. An idea so simple, it shocked the entire industry. Couples using the same bottle, the same scent. For traditional households, this broke everything. Because luxury depends on separation. But while the industry hesitated, Calvin Klein moved forward. To turn this idea into reality, two names were chosen, Alberto Morillas and Harry Fremont. The goal wasn't to create something impressive, it was to create something inevitable, and that completely changes the construction. Instead of impact, comfort. Instead of intensity, naturalness. The formula was reduced to the essential, citrus notes like lemon and bergamot. The brain instantly recognizes this as clean, without effort, without interpretation. Then, green tea. It doesn't dominate, it doesn't weigh anything down. It simply sustains the freshness, and at the base, musk, but not the heavy musk of the past. A clean musk, almost invisible. The smell of skin, only better. The result doesn't enter the room before you do. It simply follows. Like stepping out of a cold shower and putting on a fresh t-shirt. No weight, no excess, no effort. And that is dangerous for the industry, because when something is easy to use, it stops being occasional and becomes daily. But the genius didn't stop at the scent. It moved to the object, the bottle. While other brands invested in visual luxury, CK1 did the opposite. It looked like a water bottle, frosted glass, lightweight. The texture communicates freshness even before use. Minimal typography, almost invisible. No gold, no symbols, no status. And then a detail that defines everything, the cap. It's not magnetic, it's not heavy. It's a simple aluminum screw cap, direct, functional. And the most radical gesture, the sprayer came separate. You chose spray or splash. As if perfume wasn't a ritual, but part of the day. This removes an entire layer of formality. and brings the product closer to real life. And when usage becomes habit, the product stops being a choice and becomes automatic. And that's exactly what happened. CK1 left perfume stores and entered culture, appearing in unexpected places, like Tower Records, between CDs, clothes, magazines, right in the middle of real life. And that was decisive, because there, it stopped being luxury and became everyday. And then the numbers exploded. At its peak, around 20 bottles were sold per minute worldwide, without effort, without persuasion, without exaggeration, because the product didn't need to promise more than it delivered. It worked. And when they repeat it, the product stops being special. And it's exactly at that point that success starts to become a problem. But there comes a point where success stops being an advantage and starts becoming a problem. When something is everywhere, it loses exactly what the industry values most. CK1. Calvin Klein reached that point. It wasn't just on store shelves. It was everywhere. In backpacks, in bathrooms, in gyms, at parties, in airports. It was impossible not to find. And that created an inevitable side effect. The same people who helped make it popular started to reject it. Collectors began calling it common. More demanding consumers labeled it mall scent. Others were even more direct, teenager perfume. And by industry logic, that should have been the end. Because in the world of perfumery, there's a silent rule. When everyone has it, no one wants it anymore. But something strange happened. CK1 didn't disappear. It wasn't replaced. It wasn't forgotten. It simply continued. And that reveals something most products never achieve. It didn't depend on status. It depended on utility. While new fragrances emerged promising complex experiences, rare notes, exotic ingredients, elaborate stories, CK1 remained exactly the same, without trying to compete, without trying to evolve, without trying to impress. And this is where the story shifts to another level, because today, perfumery lives at the opposite extreme. Bottles that cost $400 or more, sold as unique sensory experiences, described with complex, difficult, almost inaccessible words. Perfumes that many people buy, but don't wear because they're too heavy, too specific, too loud. They exist more as a symbol than as a tool, and that creates a paradox. The more expensive and complex the perfume, the less it becomes part of real life. And that's exactly where CK1 wins, because it never tried to be more than it needed to be. It doesn't want to dominate a room. It doesn't want to impress strangers. It doesn't want to build an identity for you. It does something much simpler. It works. It delivers a clean, pleasant, predictable scent. And predictability, in this context, is not a weakness. It's efficiency. You know exactly what will happen when you wear it. No surprises, no risks, no effort. And that completely transforms the relationship with the product. You don't have to think. You just use it. And this is the point where it becomes almost invisible. Not because it fails, but because it fits perfectly. There's a principle in design that says, a product is complete, not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to remove. CK1 reached that point. Nothing is extra, nothing is missing, and any attempt to improve it would probably make it worse, heavier, more expensive, more complicated. And that would destroy exactly what makes it relevant. While the world moves toward more technology, more features, more layers, CK1 stands still, and that stillness is its advantage. It doesn't need updates. It doesn't need new versions. It doesn't need a narrative. It already solved the problem it set out to solve, and it keeps solving it, decade after decade. And that leads to an uncomfortable conclusion for the industry. Maybe most products don't need to be better. They just need to stop being worse. Because when something is simple enough, functional enough, accessible enough, it stops being a choice and becomes inevitable. And that's exactly what happened here. A $25 perfume, without luxury, without exclusivity, without complexity, became one of the most desired products in the world. Not because it tries to be special, but because it never needed to be. And in the end, that's the difference between something that feels valuable and something that actually works. While other perfumes compete to be noticed, CK1 keeps doing something much harder, being used every single day, without effort, without thinking, without replacement. And maybe that's exactly why, even after everything, everyone still wants this perfume.